After spending 45 years as the executive assistant to some of New York's most powerful business leaders, I watched my granddaughter Hannah deliberately omit my name from her graduation party guest list. When her dream job interview at Meridian Publishing arrived 6 months later, I realized the young woman I'd loved unconditionally her entire life was only interested in the connections I'd built during my embarrassing career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Wheeler, though most people in the Manhattan publishing world know me as Maggie. For nearly 5 decades, I worked behind the scenes as the executive assistant to some of the most influential figures in the industry. I've arranged meetings that led to billion-dollar deals, kept secrets that could have toppled empires, and quietly shaped decisions that transformed the literary landscape. Not that anyone outside those corner offices would know it. Executive assistants are meant to be invisible, efficient, discreet, and ultimately forgettable. At least that's what my granddaughter Hannah seemed to think. I still remember the day she first showed signs of embarrassment about my profession. She was 16, already showing promise as a writer, attending an elite private school in Connecticut, thanks partly to the education fund I'd started for her the day she was born. I'd taken the train up to watch her receive a writing award, wearing my best pantsuit and the pearl earrings my former boss, Lawrence Keller of Keller & Hayes Publishing, had given me after I helped negotiate the acquisition that saved his company. After the ceremony, I stood beaming with pride as Hannah's literature teacher approached us. "You must be so proud," she said, extending her hand. Hannah's essay on women in literature was extraordinary. She has a remarkable future ahead of her. "I'm beyond proud," I replied, shaking her hand. "I'm Margaret Wheeler, Hannah's grandmother." "Dr. Ellison," the teacher introduced herself. "Are you in publishing as well?" Hannah mentioned her family has connections in the industry. Before I could answer, Hannah stepped between us. "Grandma was an assistant," she said quickly. "She worked for a publisher before retiring. Dad's the one with the real industry experience. He's in marketing at Penguin Random House." The slight correction might have seemed innocent to Dr. Ellison, but I caught the flush of embarrassment on Hannah's cheeks, the subtle way she diminished my 4 decades of experience to elevate her father's mid-level marketing position he'd held for barely 6 years. That moment planted a seed of awareness. As Hannah grew older and more ambitious, that seed flourished into a pattern I couldn't ignore. My son Richard, Hannah's father, had never shown such embarrassment about my career. Though he'd gone to college and secured a corporate job, he understood the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother after his father abandoned us when Richard was just 4 years old. He knew how I'd worked long hours, built relationships with the industry's elite, and still managed to attend every school play and baseball game. He recognized that my just an assistant role had put him through college debt-free and given him opportunities my parents, a factory worker and a seamstress, who had immigrated from Ireland, could never have imagined for their daughter. But Hannah, born into relative comfort and privilege, saw things differently. With each passing year, I watched her narrative about me shift. At family gatherings, she would reference my administrative work with a dismissive wave. When introducing me to her friends, I became simply my grandmother with no mention of my professional life. During her college years at Columbia, where she majored in English literature with a concentration in publishing, she never once asked me for advice or insights despite my decades in the very industry she hoped to enter. The tipping point came 6 months ago, when Hannah graduated with honors. Richard and his wife Diane hosted an elaborate graduation party at their suburban Connecticut home, with catering from a trendy Manhattan restaurant and a guest list that included several of Hannah's professors and classmates. I arrived early to help with preparations, dressed in a new outfit I'd splurged on for the occasion, a tailored navy dress that Diane had helped me select, insisting it was perfect for a proud grandmother. As I arranged flowers in the dining room, I overheard Hannah speaking to her mother in the kitchen. "Is Grandma planning to tell everyone about her glory days with Lawrence Keller again?" Hannah asked, her voice carrying that unmistakable note of dread. Last time she cornered Professor Jameson and went on for half an hour about how she facilitated the merger that created Meridian Publishing. It was mortifying. "Your grandmother is proud of her career," Diane replied, her tone measured. "And she's proud of you." "Mom, she was a secretary," Hannah said with the casual cruelty of youth. "But she talks like she was some kind of power broker. It's embarrassing. Professor Jameson probably thought I was delusional about my family connections." I stood frozen among the peonies and hydrangeas, the cut stems damp in my hands. The merger Hannah dismissed so casually had been a career-defining moment. Months of late nights preparing documents, coordinating between volatile personalities, and yes, offering strategic insights that Lawrence had valued enough to incorporate into the final deal. The fact that I hadn't held the title or received the public credit didn't diminish my contribution. But how could Hannah understand that? In her world of academic achievements and credential worship, the power that exists in the shadows, in relationships, institutional knowledge, and quiet influence, was invisible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I finished arranging the flowers and quietly retreated to the guest bathroom to compose myself. When I emerged, I wore the pleasant, slightly detached smile I'd perfected over decades of boardroom meetings where I was present, but not meant to be noticed. As guests began to arrive, I took my place as the dutiful grandmother, accepting congratulations. On Hannah's behalf, refilling drinks, and staying safely away from any conversations about publishing or careers. I watched from across the room as Hannah charmed her professors and fielded questions about her job search with confident assertions about her future in publishing. "I'm focusing on editorial positions at the major houses," she told a small circle of admirers. "Though I'm particularly interested in Meridian. Their literary fiction list is exceptional." Meridian Publishing, the company born from the very merger I had helped orchestrate 15 years earlier. The company still led by Elizabeth Winters, who had once been Lawrence Keller's protégé and who sent me a handwritten birthday card every year without fail. The irony might have been amusing if it hadn't been so painful. Later that evening, as the party wound down, I overheard Richard and Diane discussing the guest list with Hannah. "I thought you were going to invite the Goldmans," Richard said. "Weren't they asking about the party last month at church?" Hannah shrugged. "They're your friends, not mine. I wanted to keep it focused on people from school and the industry." "But they've known you since you were little," Diane pressed. "And they brought that lovely gift when you got into Columbia." "I had to draw the line somewhere," Hannah replied. "Otherwise, we'd have had to invite all of Dad's colleagues and everyone from the neighborhood and—" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Even Grandma's old work friends. Can you imagine? A bunch of retired secretaries talking about typewriters and dictation? No thanks." I slipped away before they could notice me, gathering my purse and cardigan. I made quiet goodbyes, claiming fatigue, and declined Richard's offer to drive me to the train station. The 20-minute walk would do me good, I insisted. I needed the fresh air and time to think. As I walked through the manicured streets of their suburban neighborhood, I reflected on the distance that had grown between Hannah and me. I had no illusions about the glamour of my former profession, but I had always taken pride in it nonetheless. I had been the right hand to people who shaped an industry, the reliable force that turned visions into reality, the keeper of confidences and solver of impossible problems. I had built something valuable during those decades, not just a career, but a network of relationships based on trust, competence, and mutual respect. But to Hannah, I was just an embarrassment, a reminder of working-class roots she preferred to forget, a potential liability to her carefully curated professional image. By the time I boarded the train back to my modest apartment in Queens, I had made a decision. I would step back and let Hannah forge her own path without the shadow of my embarrassing career hanging over her. If that was what she wanted, I would respect it, painful as it might be. For the next 6 months, I maintained a polite distance. I called less frequently, kept our conversations focused on neutral topics, and never mentioned publishing or my former career. When Hannah shared news about job applications and interviews, I offered generic encouragement without specific advice. I declined invitations to join her and her parents for dinner when they mentioned industry people would be present. I made myself smaller, less intrusive, less embarrassing. During this time, I redirected my energy into volunteer work, teaching basic business skills at a community center for women re-entering the workforce after raising children or caring for family members. Many of these women reminded me of myself, decades earlier, smart, capable, but underestimated. In them, I found purpose and appreciation that soothed the ache of Hannah's rejection. Then, on a drizzly Tuesday in November, my phone rang with Hannah's ringtone, a sound that had become increasingly rare. "Grandma," she said, her voice vibrating with an excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "I've got amazing news. I have an interview at Meridian Publishing next week, for an actual assistant editor position, not just some intern or coordinator role." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, genuinely happy for her despite everything. "Meridian publishes beautiful books." "It's my absolute dream company," she continued, barely pausing for breath. "The position would put me directly under Sarah Collins in literary fiction. Do you know how many people would kill for that opportunity? Sarah edited both of the last 2 National Book Award winners." I did know Sarah Collins, though not well. She had been a junior editor during my final years at Keller and Hayes, before the merger that created Meridian. A serious young woman with impressive literary taste, if somewhat limited people skills. Elizabeth Winters had taken a special interest in her career. "That sounds like a perfect fit for your interests," I said carefully. There was a pause on the line, followed by a shift in Hannah's tone. "So, I was thinking," she said, her voice taking on the slightly hesitant quality I recognized from childhood requests for expensive toys. "You used to work with Lawrence Keller, right? Before he retired?" "Ah, there it was. Yes, I was Lawrence's executive assistant for 17 years, I replied evenly. "And didn't he have something to do with Meridian? Like, wasn't he one of the founders or something?" "Lawrence was the CEO of Keller and Hayes Publishing, which merged with Meridian Press 15 years ago to form what is now Meridian Publishing," I explained, the familiar facts flowing easily. "He served as chairman of the board for the combined company until his retirement 5 years ago." Right, Hannah said quickly. "So you must know people there, right? Like, maybe Elizabeth Winters?" "I've done my research, and she's still the CEO." I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to remind Hannah of all the times she had dismissed my career, all the times she had been embarrassed by my secretary status. Part of me wanted to point out the irony that she was now hoping to benefit from the very connections she had previously deemed embarrassing. But a larger part, the part that had loved this girl unconditionally since the doctor had placed her, red-faced and squalling, in my arms 23 years ago, simply wanted to help her. "Yes, I know Elizabeth," I said simply. "We've kept in touch over the years." "That's awesome." Hannah's excitement returned full force. "Do you think you could maybe put in a good word for me? Or mention to her that I'm interviewing? Not asking for special treatment or anything," she added hastily. "Just, to get my resume noticed in the pile." I thought about Elizabeth Winters, who had risen from editorial assistant to CEO through a combination of brilliant instincts, strategic thinking, and relentless work ethic. I thought about how she still called me twice a year, on my birthday, and at Christmas, often seeking my candid perspective on industry matters precisely because I had always been honest with her. I thought about the genuine affection in her voice when she'd said during our last conversation, "Maggie, publishing isn't the same without you keeping us all honest." "I'll see what I can do," I told Hannah, neither promising nor refusing outright. "Thanks, Grandma. You're the best." Her voice was warm now, appreciative in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I should go prepare. The interview is next Monday at 10 a.m. Maybe we could have lunch after. I'll tell you all about it." After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, watching the rain trace patterns on my window and contemplating what to do. The easy path would be to make the call, leverage my relationship with Elizabeth, and help Hannah get her dream job. It would restore my place in her life, earn her gratitude, and perhaps begin to heal the rift between us. But would it teach her anything about respect? About recognizing the value in people regardless of their titles? About the quiet dignity of work often deemed unimportant? Would it help her understand that the just assistants and just secretaries of the world often hold more institutional knowledge and practical power than those with impressive titles? Or would it simply reinforce her belief that connections matter more than character? I thought about my own career journey, how I had started as a typing pool secretary fresh out of high school, with no family connections or fancy education, how I had learned the business from the ground up, proven my value through competence and reliability, and eventually earned a position of trust with one of the industry's legends. How Lawrence had come to depend on not just my organizational skills but my judgment, my people insights, and my unflinching honesty. I thought about the lessons I wanted Hannah to learn as she began her own career, the kind of professional I hoped she would become. By the time the rain stopped, an evening. Shadows filled my apartment. I had made my decision. I reached for my phone and the small leather-bound address book I still maintained despite Richard's repeated offers to digitize it for me. Some connections, I believed, deserved the permanence and personal touch of handwritten records. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Elizabeth Winter's office," answered a crisp, professional voice. "Hello, this is Margaret Wheeler calling for Elizabeth," I said, my own professional tone falling into place like a well-worn glove. "Is she available? May I ask what this is regarding, Ms. Wheeler?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "Please tell her it's about a promising young candidate who's interviewing for the assistant editor position with Sarah Collins next week, and about the true value of administrative work." 2 minutes later, Elizabeth's warm, authoritative voice came on the line. "Maggie, what a lovely surprise. Madison said something about a candidate interviewing with Sarah?" "Hello, Elizabeth," I replied, smiling despite myself. "Yes, I'm calling about my granddaughter, Hannah Wheeler. She has an interview scheduled for Monday." "Your granddaughter? I had no idea she was in publishing. Tell me everything." As I began to explain the situation, including the complicated truth about Hannah's attitude toward my career, I felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within me. This conversation would set in motion events that would either bridge the gap between Hannah and me or widen it irrevocably. Either way, it would force a reckoning with truths long ignored. What I could not have anticipated was just how dramatic that reckoning would be, or how it would ultimately transform not just Hannah's understanding of my career, but her understanding of herself. Elizabeth listened patiently as I explained the situation with Hannah, the complicated dynamic between us, and my conflict over whether to help her secure an interview at Meridian Publishing. I found myself speaking with a candor that surprised even me, sharing the hurt I'd felt at being dismissed as just a secretary, and my concern that simply leveraging my connections for Hannah would teach her nothing about respect or the true value of work regardless of title. "Oh, Maggie," Elizabeth sighed when I finished. "Unfortunately, this attitude isn't uncommon among the younger generation entering publishing now. They arrive with impressive degrees and theoretical knowledge, but often lack understanding of how this business actually operates day to day. It's not entirely Hannah's fault, I admitted, trying to be fair. The industry does glorify editors and executives while making the support staff practically invisible. I never fought hard to be recognized during my career. I took pride in making things happen behind the scenes. Which is precisely why you were invaluable, Elizabeth countered. Lawrence always said he owed half his success to your judgment. Do you know he still talks about how you saved the Meridian merger when you spotted that clause in the contract that would have given Bennett controlling interest? I smiled at the memory. I had spent an entire weekend combing through hundreds of pages of legal documents, catching a subtle provision that would have fundamentally altered the power dynamics of the merged company. When I'd brought it to Lawrence's attention, he'd immediately called his lawyers and renegotiated the terms. That single finding had changed the entire trajectory of what became Meridian Publishing. That was just doing my job thoroughly, I said. And that attitude is exactly what's missing in so many candidates we interview, Elizabeth replied. They're focused on titles and prestige rather than the substance of the work. She paused. Including, perhaps, your granddaughter? Hannah is talented, I said diplomatically. She's a beautiful writer and has a genuine passion for books. She just has certain blind spots about how organizations actually function. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking through the situation. Elizabeth had always been strategic. It was why Lawrence had groomed her as his successor. I have a proposition, she finally said. Let me interview Hannah myself. You? I was startled. CEOs rarely involved themselves in assistant editor interviews. Yes, Elizabeth confirmed. Not as a favor to you, though I owe you many, but as an opportunity to properly evaluate someone entering our company with certain preconceptions. I won't mention our conversation or your connection to me unless she does. I'll simply assess her on her merits, her attitude, and her understanding of publishing as a collaborative enterprise. That's more than fair, I said, relieved that Elizabeth wasn't simply offering a nepotistic guarantee. And Maggie, she added, her voice taking on a note of mischief I remembered well from her days as a rising executive. I think I might have an idea that could prove educational for your granddaughter, with your permission. As Elizabeth outlined her plan, I felt a mixture of apprehension and appreciation. It was bold and potentially risky. Hannah might never forgive me if she discovered my involvement. But it also offered something more valuable than a simple job, referral, an opportunity for genuine understanding and growth. Are you sure this wouldn't be too disruptive to your usual hiring process? I asked when she finished explaining. Elizabeth laughed. Maggie, you spent decades making the impossible happen for Lawrence. Consider this a small repayment of that debt. Besides, her voice softened, mentorship is something I take seriously. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources. After we said our goodbyes, I sat in contemplative silence. I hadn't told Hannah that I would definitely make the call, so I wasn't breaking any promises, and Elizabeth's plan would give Hannah a fair opportunity based on her own merits, while potentially teaching her something valuable about respect and professional relationships. Still, I couldn't help feeling I was crossing some line, manipulating a situation rather than addressing it directly. It wasn't my usual approach. Throughout my career, I had valued straightforwardness, believing that clear communication solved most problems. But sometimes, I reflected, experience needs to be felt to be understood. Some lessons cannot be told. They must be lived. I decided not to call Hannah back that evening. Let her prepare for her interview, believing it was entirely on her own merits. That much, at least, was true. Elizabeth had made no promises about the outcome, only about the process. The week passed quietly. Hannah texted a few times with general updates about her preparation, but made no further mention of my connections at Meridian. I responded with encouraging messages, wishing her luck and reminding her to be herself. Simple, grandmotherly advice that couldn't possibly cause offense. On Sunday evening, my phone rang again with Hannah's call. "Grandma," she said, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. "I know it's last minute, but I was wondering if you had any advice for tomorrow. I mean, specific to Meridian, since you used to know people there." I noted her careful phrasing, not acknowledging my role directly, still keeping me at arm's length professionally while seeking my help. "Well," I said thoughtfully, "Meridian has always valued authenticity and collaborative spirit. They publish remarkable books because they bring together people with different strengths who genuinely respect each other's contributions." "That sounds like standard company culture stuff," Hannah replied, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Clearly, she had been hoping for insider information, not general principles. "It may sound standard, but it's genuinely part of Meridian's DNA," I explained. Lawrence Keller believed that great publishing happened when every person, from the receptionist to the CEO, felt ownership of the books they worked on. Elizabeth Winters has continued that philosophy. "Okay," Hannah said, still sounding uncertain. "Anything else? Like specific things I should know about Sarah Collins or the literary fiction department?" I considered mentioning what I knew about Sarah. Her brilliant editorial instincts coupled with her sometimes brusque demeanor, her preference for analytical discussions over small talk, her deep respect for writers who could articulate their creative choices. But I held back. Elizabeth's plan relied on Hannah entering this process without special preparation. "Just be honest about your passion for literature and your willingness to learn," I advised instead. "Publishing is as much about character as credentials." "Right," Hannah said, clearly still hoping for more concrete advantages. "Thanks, Grandma. I'll let you know how it goes." Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, a perfect late autumn day in New York. I went about my usual routine: coffee with the newspaper, a short walk in the neighborhood park, and some light housekeeping. I deliberately kept my phone nearby but resisted the urge to check it constantly for updates from Hannah. Around noon, just as I was preparing a simple lunch, my phone finally buzzed with a text. "Interview done. Need to process. Rain check on. Lunch? Talk tomorrow." The brevity and ambiguity of the message set alarm bells ringing. This didn't sound like someone exhilarated after a successful interview, nor did it sound like Hannah's usual detailed communications about important events. Something unexpected had occurred. I texted back a simple, "Of course, take your time. I'm here when you're ready." Then I waited, my lunch forgotten on the counter. It wasn't until nearly 9 that evening that my phone rang again. This time, when I answered, I could immediately tell something was wrong. Hannah's breathing sounded ragged, as if she'd been crying. "Grandma," she said, her voice small and tight. "Did you know?" My heart pounded. "Know what, sweetheart?" "That my interview wouldn't be with Sarah Collins, that it would be with Elizabeth Winters herself." I closed my eyes, taking a careful breath. Elizabeth had followed through exactly as she'd promised. "No," I answered truthfully. "I didn't know for certain who would interview you." A pause. "But you're not surprised?" "I'm not surprised that Elizabeth would take an interest in promising candidates," I said carefully. "She's always been hands-on with recruitment." "Grandma," Hannah said, her voice steadying with what sounded like determination. "Did you call her about me?" This was the moment of truth. I could deny it, preserve the peace between us, and never address the deeper issues. Or I could be honest and risk the fragile reconnection we'd begun to build. "Yes," I said simply. "I called Elizabeth last week." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "Why didn't you tell me?" Hannah finally asked. "I went in completely unprepared to interview with the CEO. Do you have any idea how mortifying that was?" "What happened?" I asked, avoiding her question temporarily. Hannah exhaled heavily. "I arrived expecting to meet with Sarah Collins. Instead, I was escorted to the executive floor. Elizabeth Winters herself came out to greet me, saying there had been a scheduling change and she would be conducting the initial interview." I could imagine the scene perfectly. Elizabeth's corner office with its wall of windows overlooking the midtown skyline, the elegant Danish modern furniture, the carefully curated bookshelves filled with Meridian's greatest successes. Hannah, prepared for a standard editorial interview, suddenly face-to-face with the company's legendary CEO. "She was perfectly pleasant," Hannah continued, "but her questions weren't what I expected. Instead of asking about my favorite books or editorial philosophy, she asked about my understanding of publishing operations. She wanted to know if I could explain how a manuscript moves through a publishing house, from acquisition to bookstore. She asked me to name every department involved in producing a book and describe their contributions. My lips twitched with the beginning of a smile. Elizabeth had cut right to the heart of the matter, testing whether Hannah understood publishing as a collaborative enterprise rather than just the glamorous editorial side. "And then?" Hannah's voice cracked slightly. "She asked me what I thought. The role of administrative staff was in a publishing house. When I gave some general answer about supporting executives and maintaining operations, she just stared at me and said, 'That's a remarkably limited view.'" I winced. Elizabeth had never been one to soften her criticism. She told me that in her experience, the administrative staff were often the backbone of publishing. The institutional memory, the relationship managers, the problem solvers who made everything else possible. She said that when she was starting out, the best career advice she ever got came from an executive assistant who saw her potential before anyone else did. I knew instantly who Elizabeth had been referring to. In her early days as an editor, Elizabeth had been brilliant, but sometimes tactless, alienating authors with her blunt feedback. I had gently suggested she consider how her words might land, reminding her that editorial relationships required trust as well as honesty. It was advice she had taken to heart, developing the diplomatic skills that eventually helped her rise to leadership. Then she asked if I knew any executive assistants. "Personally," Hannah continued, "I mentioned you, of course. And Grandma." Her voice faltered. Elizabeth Winters smiled and said, "Margaret Wheeler? You're Maggie's granddaughter?" I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. In that moment, Elizabeth had revealed our connection, though not our recent conversation. "She told me stories about you," Hannah said, her voice softer now. "About how you practically ran Keller and Hayes while Lawrence was the public face. How you could solve impossible problems and smooth over conflicts no one else could manage. How you identified promising manuscripts that others overlooked and connected them with the right editors." I felt a flush of pleasure at this acknowledgement, though I had never sought such recognition during my working years. "Is it true that you were the one who found Eliza Montgomery's first novel in the slush pile?" Hannah asked abruptly. I smiled at the memory. Eliza Montgomery was now one of Meridian's most celebrated authors, with multiple award-winning novels and a devoted global readership. But 30 years ago, she had been an unknown writer whose unsolicited manuscript had landed on my desk during a period when Lawrence was between assistants. "I didn't exactly find it," I clarified. "But yes, I read it when it came in unsolicited and recognized something special in her voice. I made sure it reached Lawrence's desk rather than receiving a standard rejection letter." Elizabeth said, "You've got the best eye for authentic writing she's ever encountered," Hannah said. "She said Lawrence used to have you read everything before he did because he trusted your instincts more than his own." That was an exaggeration, but not entirely untrue. Lawrence had often asked my opinion, especially on debut authors, valuing my perspective as a reader without formal literary training. "I can't believe you never told me any of this," Hannah continued, a note of accusation entering her voice. All those times I talked about wanting to work in publishing, and you never mentioned that you basically helped build one of the most prestigious houses in the industry. I did tell you, I corrected gently. Many times. You just didn't listen, because the title executive assistant didn't impress you. Another long silence followed. After all the stories about you, Hannah finally continued, Elizabeth asked me a question that I wasn't prepared for. She asked me what I had learned from you about publishing. And what did you say? I asked softly. I couldn't answer, Hannah admitted, her voice small. I realized I had never actually asked you about your work, not in any meaningful way. I just assumed. She trailed off. That I answered phones and scheduled meetings. I finished for her. Yes, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Grandma. The simple apology touched me deeply, but I sensed there was more to the story. What happened after that? Elizabeth thanked me for my time and said they would be in touch, Hannah replied. But as I was leaving, she mentioned she had an unusual opportunity she wanted me to consider. Not the assistant editor position, something else. This was not part of the plan Elizabeth and I had discussed. I found myself leaning forward, intrigued. What opportunity? She said Meridian is creating a new cross-departmental training program. New hires would spend 3 months rotating through every division of the company: editorial, marketing, sales, production, contracts, and yes, administrative operations. The goal is to develop publishers who understand the entire business, not just their specialty. That sounds like an excellent program, I said, genuinely impressed. Such comprehensive training had been rare in my day. Elizabeth said they're particularly interested in candidates who show potential but might benefit from broadening their perspective, Hannah continued. She asked if I would be interested in being considered for the pilot cohort instead of the assistant editor position. It would mean delaying my start in editorial, but potentially give me a more solid foundation. I could see exactly what Elizabeth was doing, offering Hannah a chance to develop a genuine appreciation for all aspects of publishing, including the administrative work she had previously dismissed. It was brilliantly conceived, addressing both Hannah's talent and her blind spots. What did you tell her? I asked. I said I needed time to think about it. Hannah paused. But after reflecting on our conversation all day, I've realized how narrow my vision has been. I've been so focused on becoming an editor that I never considered how many other skilled professionals contribute to making books happen. Her voice grew stronger, more certain, including executive assistants who apparently do way more than I ever understood. I smiled, feeling a warmth spreading through me at this evidence of genuine reflection. So, what are you thinking now? I'm thinking I want to accept the training program, Hannah said. But first, I want to hear from you. Really hear about your career. No more dismissing it or minimizing what you did. I want to understand what being Lawrence Keller's executive assistant actually meant. The invitation to share my professional life, to have Hannah finally see value in my career, was deeply moving. But I was also cautious. Was this newfound interest genuine, or simply a strategic move to secure her position at Meridian? I'd love to tell you about it, I said carefully. But I want to be sure you're asking because you're genuinely interested, not just because Elizabeth Winters made you feel you should be. I deserve that, Hannah acknowledged with surprising self-awareness. But Grandma, after what Elizabeth told me, I realized I've never really known you. Not the professional you. And that's entirely my fault. I made assumptions based on a job title rather than asking about your actual experiences and contributions. She took a breath. Also, I think I've been embarrassed about our family's working-class background. Dad made it into corporate marketing, but I wanted to go further. To be seen as someone who belonged in the literary world because of talent and education, not someone who worked her way up from nothing like. Like me, I finished when she hesitated. Yes, she admitted quietly. I'm not proud of it, especially now that I understand more about what you actually accomplished. Her honesty was both painful and promising. This was the most authentic conversation we'd had in years. Would you be willing to meet me for dinner tomorrow? Hannah asked. Maybe at that Italian place near your apartment that you always liked? I want to hear everything. From how you started to what you actually did day to day, to how you helped shape Meridian. I promise I'll listen this time. I considered her request. The hurt of being dismissed for so long couldn't be erased by a single revelation or apology. But the opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of genuine understanding and respect was too valuable to reject out of pride. I'd like that very much, I said. But Hannah, I want you to know that whatever you decide about Meridian's offer, it should be your decision based on your career goals, not an attempt to please me or make amends. I know, she said, but I think I've been defining those goals too narrowly. Elizabeth helped me see that, and so did you, in ways I didn't appreciate until now. After we said goodnight, I sat in my quiet apartment reflecting on the conversation. Elizabeth had gone beyond our agreement, crafting an intervention that was both more effective and more compassionate than I could have imagined. Rather than simply evaluating Hannah or making her feel small for her previous attitudes, she had offered a path forward, a way for Hannah to grow while honoring her ambitions. It was, I realized, exactly what good mentors do, and exactly what I had tried to do throughout my own career, supporting talented people while gently redirecting their blind spots. The next evening, I dressed with particular care for our dinner. Not to impress Hannah, but to honor the occasion, this new beginning between us. I chose a simple black dress I'd worn to industry events in my working years, paired with the pearl earrings Lawrence had given me, and a silk scarf Elizabeth had brought me from a publishing conference in Milan. As I fastened the pearls, I caught my reflection in the mirror. At 72, my hair had long since turned silver, and time had etched its map of lines across my face. But my eyes were bright with anticipation, and I stood with the straight-backed posture that had served me well through countless boardroom crises and delicate negotiations. I was Margaret Wheeler, former executive assistant to Lawrence Keller and trusted confidant to some of publishing's most influential figures. I had shaped books, careers, and companies from behind the scenes, without titles or public recognition. And for the first time in many years, I was about to share that professional identity with my granddaughter, not as something to minimize or explain away, but as a legacy to be understood and perhaps even valued. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted Hannah already seated at a corner table, dressed professionally as if for work rather than a casual family dinner. As I approached, she stood and, to my surprise, embraced me warmly. "I ordered you a glass of that Pinot Grigio you like," she said as we settled into our seats. "And I took the liberty of asking for some of their house-made focaccia to start." I smiled, touched by these small considerations. "Thank you, dear." Hannah fidgeted slightly with her napkin, clearly uncertain how to begin. I decided to make it easier for her. "So," I said, taking a sip of wine, "you want to know what an executive assistant actually does in publishing?" "Yes," she nodded eagerly. "But I also want to know how you got started. What was it like for you in the beginning?" I leaned back, gathering my thoughts. Well, I graduated high school in 1967, at a time when career options for women were still quite limited, especially for a girl from Queens with immigrant parents and no college prospects. I took a secretarial course at a local business school and landed my first job in the typing pool at Harper & Row. "Typing pool?" Hannah asked, her brow furrowed. "A room full of young women typing manuscripts, correspondence, contracts, anything that needed to be put on paper in those pre-computer days," I explained. "It was entry-level work, but it was my foot in the door of publishing." For the next hour, as we shared antipasti and pasta, I told Hannah stories I'd never fully shared before, about my early days learning the business from the ground up, about the casual sexism and classism I'd navigated, about the small victories and gradual recognition of my capabilities that led to better positions. By the time I met Lawrence Keller in 1978, I had worked my way up to being executive assistant to an editorial director at Simon & Schuster, I continued. Lawrence was just starting Keller and Hayes as an independent literary publisher, and he needed someone who already understood the industry. A mutual acquaintance recommended me. Was it love at first sight? Hannah asked with a small smile. Professionally speaking, I mean. I laughed. Hardly. Lawrence was brilliant but disorganized, with grandiose visions and little practical knowledge of operations. Our first month was a disaster of miscommunications and frustrations. He nearly fired me twice. What changed? There was a crisis with their lead fall title. The author was threatening to pull the manuscript over some editorial disagreements, which would have been devastating for the fledgling company. Lawrence was in London at a book fair, unreachable in the pre-cell phone era. I had to handle it. I smiled at the memory. I invited the author to the office, made her tea in actual china cups I brought from home, and simply listened to her concerns for 3 straight hours. By the end, we had worked through each issue and found compromise solutions that actually improved the book. When Lawrence returned, not only was the crisis resolved, but the author had sent him a note praising his extraordinarily insightful assistant, who understood her vision better than her editor did. What did Lawrence say? Hannah asked, clearly engrossed in the story. He called me into his office, handed me the note, and simply said, "It seems I've underestimated you, Margaret. It won't happen again." And it never did. From that day forward, we became a team. He handled the big picture vision and public role. I managed the day-to-day operations and relationships that turned that vision into reality. As our main courses arrived, I told Hannah about the growth of Keller and Hayes under Lawrence's leadership and my behind-the-scenes management, the acquisitions that defined our list, the authors we nurtured from debut to stardom, the crises averted and opportunities seized through quick thinking and collaborative problem-solving. So, when the merger with Meridian Press happened, Hannah said, connecting the dots, you were instrumental in making it work. I facilitated the process, I acknowledged. Lawrence had the vision, but yes, I helped navigate the complex personalities and competing interests to create something stronger than either company could have been alone. Hannah shook her head slowly. I can't believe I never knew any of this. Or rather, I can't believe I never bothered to ask. She looked at me directly, her eyes earnest. I've missed out on so much wisdom I could have learned from you, Grandma. Not just about publishing, but about how to be a professional with integrity and purpose. The genuine regret in her voice touched me deeply. We're talking now, I said gently. That's what matters. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I've made a decision about Meridian's offer, she said. I'm going to accept the training program. Not just because Elizabeth Winters suggested it, but because I realize now how much I don't know about the full scope of publishing. I think that's wise, I replied, careful not to sound too triumphant. Editorial skills are valuable, but understanding the entire ecosystem of how books are made and sold will make you a more effective publishing professional in the long run. Hannah nodded, then took a deep breath as if preparing to say something difficult. I also owe you an apology, a real one, not just for dismissing your career, but for how I've treated you these past few years, keeping you at a distance from my professional life, being embarrassed about introducing you to professors and colleagues. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. The simple, straightforward apology, offered without excuses or qualification, was exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you, Hannah. That means a lot to me. I'd like to make it up to you, she continued earnestly. Maybe you could. I don't know. Mentor me? Share your experiences and insights as I start this program? I have so much to learn, and not just about publishing operations, about professionalism and building relationships and all the things they don't teach in school. I smiled, feeling a weight lifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. I'd be honored to mentor you, Hannah, though I suspect you'll soon discover I'm full of old-fashioned ideas. Old-fashioned isn't the same as outdated, she replied with unexpected wisdom. Some principles of good work are timeless. As we finished our meal and shared a tiramisu for dessert, our conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Hannah asked thoughtful questions about my experiences, and I found myself sharing insights about publishing that I'd never had the opportunity to articulate before. By the time we parted on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, something fundamental had shifted between us. The gulf of misunderstanding that had separated us was beginning to close, replaced by a newfound appreciation of each other as people, not just as grandmother and granddaughter, but as two women connected by blood, and now, potentially, by professional understanding as well. As Hannah hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Grandma. And thank you for calling Elizabeth Winters, even when I didn't deserve your help." I held her close for a moment, this beautiful, flawed young woman who was finally beginning to see beyond the limitations of titles and status to the deeper truths of value and contribution. "You deserve the truth," I said simply. "Now go make the most of this opportunity. Not for me or for Elizabeth, but for yourself and for the books you'll help bring into the world." As I watched her walk toward the subway, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not because my plan had worked or because my pride had been vindicated, but because Hannah was embarking on a journey of genuine growth and self-discovery. And perhaps most importantly, because we were rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth, respect, and mutual appreciation, the same values that had guided my career for nearly 5 decades. It wasn't about the title, after all. It never had been. 3 weeks later, I sat in the soaring lobby of Meridian Publishing's Manhattan headquarters, waiting for Hannah to meet me for lunch. The space had changed dramatically since my working days. The dark wood paneling and heavy furniture replaced by an airy, light-filled atrium with modern art installations and comfortable seating areas where editors could be seen conferring with authors over coffee. Yet beneath the contemporary renovation, I could still sense the DNA of the company Lawrence and I had helped build, the reverence for books evident in the floor-to-ceiling shelves displaying Meridian's most celebrated titles, the buzz of purposeful, creative energy as staff moved through the space with manuscripts and proofs in hand. "Ms. Wheeler?" A young man approached, tablet in hand. "Hannah asked me to let you know she's wrapping up a meeting with the production department. She'll be down in about 10 minutes. Can I get you anything while you wait?" "I'm fine, thank thee." "You," I replied with a smile. How polite these young assistants always were, a constant in publishing despite all the technological changes. "It's an honor to meet you," he added unexpectedly. "I'm in the associate program with Hannah. She's told us so much about your years with Lawrence Keller." I blinked in surprise. Hannah had been talking about me? About my career? "All good things, I hope," I said lightly. "Absolutely. She mentioned you were instrumental in acquiring Thomas Morton's first novel. That's like publishing legend status." Before I could respond, Hannah appeared from the elevator bank, walking briskly across the lobby. She looked different somehow, still stylish in a tailored black pantsuit, but with an added confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there before. 3 weeks into Meridian's cross-departmental training program, she carried herself like someone who belonged in these hallways, not merely someone trying to prove she deserved to be there. "Grandma, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," she said, embracing me warmly. "Our production meeting ran over. We were discussing paper stock options for the spring list, and I completely lost track of time." Paper stock discussions. Not exactly the glamorous editorial work Hannah had once dreamed of, yet she seemed genuinely engaged. "Thank you, Trey," she added to the young man, who nodded and discreetly withdrew. "Paper stock, I said as we headed toward the revolving doors. "Fascinating stuff." Hannah laughed, recognizing my gentle teasing. "Actually, it is fascinating. Did you know the difference in paperweight can change shipping costs by thousands of dollars across a print run? Or that certain stocks take foil stamping better than others?" I had no idea how many technical decisions go into the physical production of a book. The genuine enthusiasm in her voice was striking. This was not the Hannah who had dismissed anything outside editorial as beneath her interest. "I did know that, actually," I replied as we emerged onto the bustling midday street. "I sat in on production meetings for years. Lawrence always wanted me there to track the budget implications of creative decisions." "Of course you did," Hannah said, shaking her head with a rueful smile. "I'm beginning to think there wasn't any aspect of publishing you weren't involved in." We made our way to a small French bistro a few blocks from Meridian's offices, a longtime industry lunch spot that had miraculously survived the neighborhood's ever-rising rents. As we settled into a quiet corner table, I observed Hannah more carefully. Beyond the confidence in her posture, there was a new attentiveness in her manner, an eagerness to absorb information rather than simply demonstrate her own knowledge. "So," I said after we'd ordered, 3 weeks into the program. How are you finding it?" Hannah's eyes lit up. "It's incredible, Grandma. Exhausting and overwhelming at times, but incredible. We started in contracts and rights, which I thought would be dry and technical, but it turns out to be fascinating. Did you know that a single book can generate revenue through dozens of different licenses and formats?" I nodded, smiling at her newfound appreciation for publishing's business side. The revenue streams have only multiplied since my day. Back then it was primarily hardcover, paperback, book club, and maybe a film option if you were lucky. Now, there are ebooks, digital audio, apps, merchandise. "Exactly," Hannah leaned forward eagerly. "And each format requires different negotiation and expertise. The rights director let me sit in on a call with a Japanese publisher interested in translating one of our literary novels. The nuances of that conversation were incredible." Our salads arrived, and Hannah barely paused for breath as she continued describing her experiences. The day spent with the production team at a printing plant in New Jersey, the marketing meeting where they debated positioning strategies for a debut author, the afternoon shadowing the art department as they developed cover concepts. "And tomorrow, we finally start our week with editorial," she said, spearing a forkful of niçoise salad. "Though I have to admit, I'm not as fixated on that department as I was before." "Oh." I tried to keep the satisfaction from my voice. "That's a change." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm realizing that the editorial role is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A crucial piece, certainly, but not the only one that matters. Every department contributes something essential to a book's success." "That's a valuable perspective," I said. "Many young people enter publishing fixated on becoming editors without understanding the collaborative nature of the business." "Like I was," Hannah acknowledged ruefully. "But this program is changing that. Elizabeth was right. Seeing the entire ecosystem is giving me a much richer understanding of how publishing actually works." At the mention of Elizabeth, I felt a flicker of curiosity. "How much interaction have you had with her since your interview?" "She meets with our cohort once a week for a roundtable discussion," Hannah explained. "It's incredible. She asks us what we're learning, challenges our assumptions, and shares these amazing stories from her own career." She paused, giving me a significant look, "Many of which feature you, by the way." "I can only imagine," I said dryly. "Elizabeth has always had a flair for the dramatic. She told us about the time you salvaged the Thomas Morton book tour after he showed up drunk to his Good Morning America interview." I chuckled at the memory. Thomas Morton, brilliant but volatile, had nearly destroyed his career that morning before I intervened, sobering him up with black coffee and a stern talking to before his next appearance. "That was just crisis management," I said modestly. "Part of the job." "That's what's so amazing," Hannah replied earnestly. "All these things you did, nurturing authors, solving problems, shaping company strategy, you saw them as just part of the job, rather than exceptional contributions worthy of recognition." I considered this as I finished my salad. She wasn't wrong. Throughout my career, I had rarely sought credit for my accomplishments, taking pride in work well done rather than public acknowledgement. That was the culture then, I explained. Executive assistants were expected to be invisible forces behind the scenes. We measured our success by our boss's achievements, not our own recognition. Hannah frowned slightly. "But doesn't that bother you? Knowing that Lawrence Keller got the public credit for work you contributed to significantly." It was a fair question, one I had contemplated many times over the years. "Lawrence never failed to acknowledge my contributions privately," I said carefully. "He compensated me generously, trusted my judgment, and made me feel valued as a true partner in the business." I paused, trying to articulate something I'd never fully expressed before. "There's a different kind of power in being underestimated, Hannah. When you're not the person everyone's watching, you have freedom to maneuver, to observe, to influence from angles others don't expect." Hannah considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought about it that way. Besides," I added with a small smile, "I wasn't completely without recognition. The people who mattered in publishing knew exactly who handled the real work at Keller and Hayes." "Like Elizabeth Winters," Hannah nodded, "and many others. In publishing, as in many industries, there's the official hierarchy everyone can see. And then there's the informal influence network that actually gets things done. The assistants, the production managers, the publicists who've been there for decades, they're often the ones who really know how to make the impossible happen." Our waiter appeared to clear our plates and offer dessert menus. Hannah glanced at her watch and declined regretfully. "I need to get back for a meeting with the sales team at 2. But Grandma, I'd love to continue this conversation. Maybe dinner next week? There's something specific I wanted to ask your advice about." "Of course," I agreed, curious but not wanting to press for details. This new, more considerate Hannah was still something of a revelation, asking for my time rather than assuming it, expressing genuine interest in my experiences rather than dismissing them. As we walked back toward the Meridian building, Hannah surprised me again by asking, "Would you want to come up and see the offices? I could show you where I've been working, introduce you to some people." The invitation touched me deeply. After years of being kept separate from Hannah's professional life, being deliberately invited into it felt significant. "I'd like that very much," I said. Upstairs, Hannah led me through the labyrinth of Meridian's offices, pointing out different departments and introducing me to colleagues with a pride that warmed my heart. Many of the older staff recognized me, greeting me with genuine pleasure and respect. "Maggie Wheeler! I haven't seen you since Lawrence's retirement party," exclaimed James Davidson, the veteran production director who had been with the company since before the merger. "We were just reminiscing about the Burke biography disaster of '97. No one could figure out how you managed to get that manuscript completely reset and reprinted in 3 days after we discovered the legal issues." I laughed, the memory vivid even after all these years. A lot of coffee, very little sleep, and calling in every favor the company was owed by the printer. Hannah watched these interactions with fascination, seeing firsthand the genuine regard in which I was held by industry veterans. Far from being just Lawrence Keller's secretary, I had been a known quantity in my own right, a problem solver, a negotiator, a trusted advisor across departmental lines. As we approached a corner office with glass walls, Hannah lowered her voice. "That's Elizabeth's office. She's on a conference call now, but..." Before she could finish, the office door opened and Elizabeth herself emerged, as elegant and commanding as ever despite the decades since we had worked closely together. At 65, her once dark hair was now a stylish silver, but her sharp eyes and decisive bearing were unchanged. "I thought I heard a familiar voice," she said, breaking into a warm smile. "Maggie, what a wonderful surprise." "Hello, Elizabeth," I replied as she embraced me briefly. "Hannah was kind enough to give me a tour." "Perfect timing. My call just ended." "Come in, both of you," she insisted, ushering us into her office. The space was unmistakably Elizabeth, sleek and modern, but with carefully chosen personal touches, including a wall of framed book covers representing Meridian's most successful titles under her leadership. "Hannah is making quite an impression. In our training program," Elizabeth said once we were seated, directing an approving nod toward my granddaughter. "Her analysis of our international rights opportunities was remarkably insightful for someone so new to the industry." I glanced at Hannah, noticing the flush of pleasure at this praise from someone she clearly admired. "I'm not surprised," I replied. "She's always had a good eye for potential others might miss." "A family trait, it seems," Elizabeth said meaningfully, "which reminds me." She turned to a bookshelf behind her desk and removed a handsomely bound book with a familiar cover. "I was planning to have this delivered to you, but since you're here." She handed me the book, a 50th anniversary edition of Thomas Morton's debut novel, The Boundary Stones, the very book I had helped rescue from rejection decades ago. I opened it to find a new introduction, and my breath caught as I scanned the first paragraph. The story of how The Boundary Stones came to be published is nearly as remarkable as the novel itself. In 1975, a young executive assistant named Margaret Wheeler pulled this manuscript from a stack of unsolicited submissions, recognized its extraordinary potential despite its unconventional structure, and championed it to a reluctant publisher. Her persistence launched not only this landmark novel, but in many ways the literary identity of what would eventually become Meridian Publishing. I looked up, unable to hide my surprise. "Elizabeth, It's long overdue recognition," she said firmly. "When we planned this anniversary edition, I insisted that the true origin story be included. Thomas was delighted, by the way. He's never forgotten how you defended his work when others dismissed it." I ran my fingers over the embossed cover, emotion tightening my throat. For decades, I had told myself that public recognition didn't matter, that I took satisfaction in the behind-the-scenes impact of my work. Yet, holding this tangible acknowledgement of my contribution, seeing my name literally written into the history of a book that had changed American literature, affected me more deeply than I would have imagined. "Thank you," I said simply, not trusting myself to say more. Hannah was watching me, her expression a mixture of pride and something that looked remarkably like awe. "I can't believe I never knew this story," she said softly. "My own grandmother discovered Thomas Morton." "One of many contributions that went uncredited at the time," Elizabeth noted. "Publishing has never been particularly good at acknowledging the collaborative nature of our work, especially when it comes to staff in support roles." She glanced at her watch and stood. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. Hannah, we'll see you at the editorial orientation tomorrow. And Maggie," she fixed me with her characteristic direct gaze, "don't be a stranger. The institutional memory you carry is more valuable than ever in these rapidly changing times." After Elizabeth left, Hannah and I made our way back toward the elevator bank. I clutched the anniversary edition to my chest, still processing the unexpected recognition it represented. "Grandma," Hannah said hesitantly as we waited for the elevator, "would you be willing to read something I've written? It's a proposal for a project I'm developing as part of the training program." "Of course," I replied, touched by the request. "What kind of project?" The elevator arrived, and as we stepped inside, Hannah explained, "Each trainee is asked to identify an opportunity or problem at Meridian and develop a proposal to address it. Most people choose marketing initiatives or acquisition strategies. She paused, then continued with growing enthusiasm. But I've been thinking about something different. An oral history project documenting the contributions of administrative staff throughout Meridian's history. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The idea came from learning about your work, Hannah continued earnestly. I started talking with some of the longtime assistants here, asking about their experiences, the projects they've shaped, the institutional knowledge they carry. Their stories are fascinating, Grandma, and completely undocumented. When these people retire, all that history and perspective could be lost. The elevator reached the lobby, and we stepped out into the bustling space. Hannah was still talking, her excitement palpable. I'm proposing a series of video interviews, transcripts, and eventually maybe even a book. The Hidden Architecture of Publishing, or something like that. Elizabeth thinks it has potential, but I want your perspective. Before I finalize anything, I found my voice at last. It's a wonderful idea, Hannah. Those stories deserve to be preserved. She beamed at my approval. Would you be willing to be my first interview subject? Your experiences could provide a framework for the entire project. The request moved me deeply. Not just the recognition of my career it represented, but the genuine evolution it signified in Hannah herself. From dismissing my work as embarrassing to actively championing the value of roles like mine, the transformation was remarkable. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. Outside on the sidewalk, Hannah checked her phone and grimaced. I really do need to get back upstairs for that sales meeting. She hesitated, then hugged me impulsively. Thank you for coming today, Grandma. And for... She gestured vaguely, seemingly at a loss for words. Everything. As I watched her hurry back into the building, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in Hannah's growth, gratification at seeing my work acknowledged after so many years, and a deeper sense of vindication that went beyond personal recognition. It wasn't just about me, or even about Hannah. It was about all the just assistants whose contributions had shaped industries while remaining invisible in official histories. Perhaps Hannah's project would help change that narrative, creating space for a more inclusive understanding of how organizations actually function and who drives their success. On the subway ride home, I opened the anniversary edition again, reading more of the introduction that credited my role in discovering Thomas Morton. It was a strange feeling seeing my name in print this way, like finding a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. Yet what moved me most wasn't the public acknowledgement, but the private transformation it represented in my relationship with Hannah. From dismissal to genuine respect, from shame to pride, the journey we had taken together over these past weeks felt more significant than any professional recognition. Back in my apartment, I placed the book carefully on my coffee table, then noticed the light blinking on my answering machine. I pressed play to hear Lawrence Keller's familiar voice, now roughened slightly with age. Maggie, it's Lawrence. Elizabeth just called to tell me about the anniversary edition and your visit to Meridian today. I should have insisted on that. Acknowledgement years ago. It was long overdue. Anyway, I'm in town next week for the Publishers Association dinner. Let's have lunch. I could use your advice on this memoir my agent is pestering me to write. You always were the best judge of what stories were worth telling. I smiled at the message. Lawrence, now in his 80s, was still Lawrence, assuming my time was available, certain of my interest in his projects. Yet there was genuine affection in his gruffness, the respect of a man who knew exactly how much of his success had been built on my capabilities. I picked up the phone to return his call, but before I could dial, it rang in my hand. Hannah again. Grandma, she said without preamble, I had an idea during the sales meeting. Would you be free this Saturday? There's someone I'd like you to meet. Of course, I replied, intrigued by the mysterious invitation. Who is it? My friend Zoe. From the program. She's brilliant. Focus in digital marketing, MBA from Wharton. But she's struggling with the production segment. She understands the analytics perfectly, but can't seem to grasp how all the pieces fit together in actual book production. And you thought I might help? I asked, surprised but pleased by the request. Exactly. No one explains publishing systems better than you do. We could meet at that coffee shop near your apartment, the one with the good scones. The casual way Hannah referenced my skills, the easy assumption that I had valuable expertise to share. These small gestures of respect meant more than any formal recognition. I'd be happy to meet with her, I said. 2:00 work for you? Perfect. Thank you, Grandma. You're the best. There was a muffled voice in the background. Sorry, got to run. We're heading into another meeting. See you Saturday. After. We hung up. I sat for a long moment, reflecting on the remarkable turn our relationship had taken. From being the grandmother, Hannah was ashamed to claim professionally to being someone whose expertise she actively sought to share with colleagues. It was a transformation I wouldn't have dared hope for just months ago. I thought about the anniversary edition with my name in the introduction, about Elizabeth's warm welcome, about Lawrence's call, about Hannah's oral history project, all validations of work I had done decades ago, contributions that had shaped books and careers, and ultimately a company. But more meaningful than any of these acknowledgments was the simple fact that Hannah now saw me, truly saw me, as a professional with valuable experience, rather than just her grandmother with an embarrassing job. That shift in perception represented not just a personal reconciliation, but a deeper recognition of dignity in work often deemed unimportant. I picked up a framed photo from my end table, a snapshot from early in my career, showing me at my desk outside Lawrence's office, phone, cradled against my shoulder, calendar open before me, a stack of manuscripts at my elbow. My face in the photo showed focus and competence, a young woman fully engaged in work she found meaningful, regardless of her title. That young woman had never needed external validation to know her worth. She had found satisfaction in problems solved, in authors nurtured, in books brought successfully into the world, even when her contributions remained behind the scenes. But how healing it felt, after all these years, to have that worth recognized, not just by industry figures like Elizabeth and Lawrence, but by my own granddaughter. The next morning, I woke early with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Hannah's oral history project had sparked something in me, a desire to revisit my own professional journey more systematically, to excavate stories and lessons that might be valuable to others. I cleared my dining table and began sorting through the boxes of memorabilia I had preserved from my working years: correspondence, photographs, publishing catalogs, handwritten notes from authors expressing gratitude for my help with their manuscripts or tours. By mid-morning, I had created an impromptu timeline of my career, physical artifacts arranged chronologically across the table's surface. Looking at it this way, I could trace the evolution not just of my own role, but of the publishing industry itself, from the typewriter era through word processors to the digital age, from a business dominated by gentlemen publishers to one increasingly led by women like Elizabeth. On impulse, I reached for my phone and called Hannah. "Grandma, hi," she answered, sounding slightly breathless. "I was just thinking about you. I've been drafting questions for our interview." "That's actually why I'm calling," I said. "I've been looking through my old papers this morning, and I realized I have quite a bit of material that might be useful for your project. Photographs, correspondence, even some old catalogs and marketing materials that show how the business has evolved." "That's incredible!" Hannah's excitement was palpable. "Primary sources are exactly what this project needs. Could I come by this evening to look through them with you? I can bring dinner." "I'd like that," I replied. "But Hannah, I've been thinking about your project in a broader sense. What if, rather than just focusing on administrative staff at Meridian, you expanded the scope to trace how support roles have evolved and contributed to publishing's development over time? It could provide valuable context for understanding the industry's present challenges. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end. That's brilliant, Grandma. It would make the project more historically significant and probably more interesting to a wider audience. She laughed suddenly. Look at us, collaborating on a publishing project. Who would have thought? Who indeed? Certainly not the Hannah who had been embarrassed by my career just months ago, nor the Margaret who had resigned herself to being kept separate from her granddaughter's professional aspirations. Life takes unexpected turns, I said simply. It really does, Hannah agreed, her voice warm. I'll see you around 7 then? I'll bring Ty from that place you like. After we hung up, I returned to my timeline of artifacts, seeing them with fresh eyes, not just as mementos of my own career, but as documents of an evolving profession, evidence of the often invisible work that made books possible. I picked up a thank you note from a debut novelist whose manuscript I had championed against significant internal opposition. You saw potential in my work when others didn't, she had written. I will never forget that act of faith. That author had gone on to win a Pulitzer Prize, her books now fixtures on college syllabi nationwide. These were the moments that had defined my career, not job titles or public recognition, but the quiet impact of work done with care and conviction. That Hannah now valued these contributions enough to want to document them felt like the closing of a circle, a vindication not just of my own choices, but of all those who had found purpose in supporting roles. I carefully returned the memorabilia to its boxes, saving the organization for Hannah's visit this evening. We would sort through them together, granddaughter and grandmother, two publishing professionals from different generations, sharing perspectives on an industry we both loved. The thought filled me with a quiet joy. Not because Hannah had finally recognized my professional worth, though that validation was certainly meaningful, but because we had found a new dimension to our relationship, a shared passion that transcended our differences and connected us in unexpected ways. The journey from just an embarrassment to valued mentor had been painful at times, forcing both of us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Yet the relationship we were building now felt more authentic and equal than anything we had shared before. As I closed the last box, my phone chimed with a text from Hannah. Just had the best idea for your interview. Instead of filming at my place as planned, what if we did it at Meridian in Lawrence's old office? Elizabeth says we can use it next week when the current occupant is on vacation. Would be a perfect setting. I smiled at the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. Hannah was right. There would be a certain poetry in telling my stories in the space, where so many of them had unfolded, where I had spent decades as the power behind the throne. Perfect, I texted back. Some stories belong in their natural habitat. As I set my phone down, I caught my reflection in the window, an older woman with silver hair and laugh lines, eyes bright with purpose. Not Lawrence Keller's secretary, or Hannah's embarrassing grandmother, but Margaret Wheeler, professional in her own right, with a legacy worthy of documentation and a wealth of experience to share. The revelation had come late in life, but perhaps that made it all the more valuable. After decades in the background, I was finally stepping into the spotlight, not because I had sought it out, but because my granddaughter had recognized that some lights shine too brightly to remain hidden. And in that recognition lay the most meaningful acknowledgement of all. Ready when you are, Grandma, Hannah called, adjusting the small camera mounted on a tripod. We were in Lawrence Keller's old office at Meridian Publishing, now occupied by the editorial director who was conveniently on vacation. Elizabeth had arranged for us to use the space for Hannah's oral history project, and my granddaughter had transformed it into an impromptu recording studio. The office had changed considerably since my days working with Lawrence, modernized with sleek furniture and contemporary art, but the bones remained the same. The grand windows still overlooked Madison Avenue. The built-in bookshelves still displayed leather-bound editions of Meridian's literary treasures, and the imposing desk still dominated the room, though Lawrence's beloved antique had been replaced with something more ergonomic. I smoothed the lapel of my navy blazer, touching the vintage brooch pinned there, a silver typewriter that Lawrence had given me on our 10th work anniversary. "I've never been interviewed on camera before," I admitted, feeling an unexpected flutter of nerves. "Are you sure anyone will find my stories interesting?" Hannah looked up from her notes, her expression incredulous. "Are you kidding? Your stories are publishing gold, Grandma. Elizabeth has already asked if we can use excerpts for Meridian's upcoming 75th anniversary celebration. That was news to me." "She has?" "Absolutely. She thinks your perspective is crucial to understanding the company's evolution." Hannah fiddled with the lighting setup one last time, then sat in the chair opposite mine. "And personally, I think your experiences offer invaluable lessons about the publishing industry that aren't found in any textbook or MBA program." The confidence in her voice, the genuine respect, still caught me off guard sometimes. The transformation in Hannah over these past 2 months had been remarkable. From dismissing my career as embarrassing to championing its significance, it was a journey neither of us could have anticipated. "All right then," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Where shall we begin?" Hannah clicked the record button and smiled at me with professional warmth. "Margaret Wheeler, thank you for joining me today for this conversation about your career in publishing. You spent nearly 5 decades in the industry, most notably as executive assistant to Lawrence Keller at Keller & Hayes Publishing and later Meridian Publishing. How did your journey in publishing begin?" The formality of her introduction made me smile. This was Hannah in her professional element, poised, articulate, focused. I took a breath and began sharing the story of my entry into publishing. The young woman from Queens with immigrant parents and a high school diploma, determined to find meaningful work in a city that often seemed designed to overwhelm newcomers. As I spoke, the initial nervousness faded. These were my stories, after all. Experiences I had lived, challenges I had overcome, a career I had built day by day through perseverance and adaptability. Hannah proved to be a skilled interviewer, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and guiding the conversation with gentle prompts when needed. "You mentioned discovering Thomas Morton's manuscript in the unsolicited submissions," she said, after I recounted some early experiences. "Could you walk us through how that happened? It's become something of a legend at Meridian." I leaned back, transported to that moment in 1975 when a thick manila envelope had arrived on my desk with no agent representation, no professional formatting, just raw talent bound in rubber bands with a handwritten cover letter. "It was actually against company policy for me to even read it," I explained. "Unsolicited manuscripts were supposed to be returned with a form letter, but something about Morton's cover letter caught my attention. The urgency of his voice, the clarity with which he described what he was trying to accomplish. So I took it home over the weekend. I described staying up until dawn, unable to put the manuscript down despite its structural flaws and excessive length. How I'd returned to the office Monday morning determined to make Lawrence read it, despite his notorious resistance to unagented submissions. "I basically ambushed him," I admitted with a laugh. "I put selected passages on top of his morning call sheet, the one document I knew he'd look at immediately. When he asked where they came from, I confessed I'd read an unsolicited manuscript. He was irritated at first, but by lunchtime, he was halfway through it and canceling his afternoon appointments to finish." "And the rest is literary history," Hannah supplied. "Morton became one of Meridian's most acclaimed authors." "Not without considerable debate," I clarified. "The acquisitions committee was deeply divided. The sales director thought it was too experimental to market effectively. The managing editor found the structure self-indulgent. If Lawrence hadn't championed it so forcefully, it might never have been published." But it was your initial recognition that made that possible, Hannah pointed out. If you had followed policy and returned it unread, no one would have discovered Morton's talent. The observation gave me pause. I had never quite framed it that way in my own mind, focusing instead on Lawrence's decision to acquire the book, rather than my role in bringing it to his attention. I suppose that's true, I acknowledged, though I certainly wasn't thinking about making publishing history at the time. I was just responding to writing that moved me. That's exactly what makes your contribution so significant, Hannah said earnestly. You weren't constrained by market trends or commercial considerations. You responded as a reader, authentically, intuitively. And that fresh perspective brought something valuable into the company that might otherwise have been missed. Her insight surprised me, not just its accuracy, but the genuine appreciation behind it. This was not the grudging acknowledgement of a granddaughter humoring an elder, but the thoughtful analysis of one publishing professional recognizing another's contribution. We continued this way for over an hour, exploring different aspects of my career: crisis management during author meltdowns, navigating the complex personalities of creative teams, the behind-the-scenes work of the Meridian merger, the evolution of the industry from a gentleman's club to a more diverse, though still imperfect, business. Throughout it all, Hannah listened with genuine fascination, occasionally sharing her own observations about how certain aspects of publishing had changed or remained remarkably consistent. It felt less like an interview and more like a conversation between colleagues from different generations, each bringing valuable perspective to the exchange. When we finally took a break, Hannah reviewed some of the footage on her laptop, nodding with satisfaction. This is gold, Grandma. Absolute gold. The historical context you provide about how decisions were actually made, the practical wisdom about relationship management in publishing, it's invaluable. I'm glad you think so, I said, touched by her enthusiasm, though I worry I'm painting too rosy a picture. Publishing had its problems then, just as it does now. The lack of diversity, the economic challenges for younger staff, the power imbalances. You've been candid about those issues too, Hannah assured me. That's what makes this compelling. It's not a sanitized corporate history. It's the real human story of how books got made, with all the messiness and compromise that entails. She glanced at her watch. We should probably wrap up soon. Elizabeth mentioned she might stop by around noon. We resumed filming, shifting focus to the latter part of my career and the lessons I'd learned about effective collaboration in creative enterprises. As I described the delicate balance of supporting artistic vision while maintaining business viability, I noticed Hannah taking handwritten notes in addition to recording. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone just starting in publishing today? She asked as we neared the end of our session. I considered the question carefully. Remember that everyone you encounter in this business, from the mail, room clerk to the CEO, has the potential to contribute something valuable to a book's journey. Titles and positions matter far less than curiosity, dedication, and genuine love of storytelling. I smiled, thinking of my own unlikely path. The person delivering coffee to an editorial meeting today might be running the company in 20 years. The quiet assistant taking minutes might have better instincts for emerging literary voices than anyone with an executive title. In publishing, potential comes in all packages, and wisdom can be found in unexpected places. Hannah nodded thoughtfully. That connects to something Elizabeth often says, that publishing is one of the few industries where your position on the organizational chart doesn't necessarily correlate with your influence on the product. Elizabeth would know, I agreed. She started as an editorial assistant with no connections, no fancy degree, just sharp instincts and relentless work ethic. Lawrence recognized her potential early, just as his predecessor had recognized his. A knock at the door interrupted us, and Elizabeth herself appeared, elegant as always in a charcoal suit. I hope I'm not interrupting? Perfect timing, Hannah said, standing to greet her. We were just wrapping up. Don't stop on my account, Elizabeth protested. I just wanted to see how it was going. We've captured some wonderful material, Hannah assured her, gesturing for Elizabeth to join us. Actually, would you be willing to add your perspective? I think it would be incredibly valuable to include your reflections on working with Grandma during the Meridian merger. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, looking pleased by the invitation. I'd be delighted. Though I should warn you, your grandmother's modesty might be challenged by my recollections. I laughed, genuinely curious to hear Elizabeth's perspective. I think I can handle it. Hannah quickly adjusted the camera to accommodate our new arrangement, and soon we were engaged in a three-way conversation that felt remarkably like the strategy sessions the three of us might have had if I'd still been working at Meridian when Hannah joined. Elizabeth spoke candidly about my role during the merger, how I had served as a diplomatic bridge between the two companies' cultures, smoothing ruffled feathers and finding practical solutions when executives reached impasses. The truth is, Elizabeth said, looking directly at the camera, I'm not sure Meridian Publishing would exist in its current form without Margaret Wheeler's contributions. While Lawrence and the other executives were focused on the big picture strategy, Maggie was quietly solving the 100 daily problems that could have derailed the entire process. The praise made me uncomfortable, as it always had. I was just doing my job, I demurred. That's exactly what makes your contribution so remarkable, Elizabeth countered. You never saw these crucial interventions as extraordinary, just as the natural extension of your responsibilities. That attitude made you invaluable. She turned to Hannah. Your grandmother exemplifies something I try to instill in all our new hires, that excellence isn't about recognition or titles, but about the consistent quality of your contributions, whether anyone is watching or not. Hannah nodded, clearly filing this wisdom away. That's precisely why this oral history project feels so important. These perspectives on quiet excellence and behind-the-scenes impact aren't typically preserved in company histories. Which is why I'm so pleased you're undertaking it, Elizabeth agreed. Now more than ever, as we navigate industry disruption and technological change, understanding the human systems that have always made publishing work is crucial. After capturing about 20 minutes of this three-generation conversation, Hannah wrapped up the filming, thanking both of us with professional courtesy that made me absurdly proud. I've arranged lunch for us in the executive dining room, Elizabeth announced. I hope you both can join me. Lawrence is meeting us there. Lawrence is here? I asked, surprised. Though we occasionally met for lunch or spoke by phone, I hadn't expected to see him today. When I mentioned you were being interviewed in his old office, he insisted on coming by, Elizabeth explained with a smile. He claims he wants to ensure you don't spread revisionist history about his tenure, but I suspect he's actually quite proud that your contributions are finally being documented. As Hannah packed up her equipment, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable circumstances that had brought us to this moment. Just months ago, Hannah had been embarrassed by my career, dismissing me as just a secretary whose professional history had no relevance to her ambitions. Now here we were, collaborating on a project that placed my experiences at the center, with the company's current CEO enthusiastically participating. Life's strange circles never ceased to amaze me. The executive dining room at Meridian was another. Space transformed since my day. The dark paneling and heavy draperies replaced by light woods and expansive windows that offered dramatic views of the city. Lawrence was already seated at a corner table when we arrived, rising with some effort to embrace me. At 84, he remained a commanding presence despite the walking cane he now relied upon. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a full head, of silver hair, and the penetrating gaze that had intimidated authors and executives alike during his publishing reign. Maggie, he said gruffly, still looking younger than you have any right to. And you're still a terrible flatterer, Lawrence, I replied with the easy familiarity of decades. He turned to Hannah, assessing her with the shrewd publisher's eye that had evaluated countless young talents. So you're the granddaughter who's finally documenting Maggie's contributions. About time someone did. Hannah accepted his handshake with composed confidence that impressed me. Many young people found Lawrence intimidating, but she met his gaze directly. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Keller. Your publishing legacy is legendary. My publishing legacy, he harumphed, pulling out chairs for both of us with old-school courtesy, was built in no small part by your grandmother's judgment and discretion, something I suspect she's too modest to have emphasized in your interview. Grandma has been characteristically humble, Hannah agreed, but the historical record will be more complete now, thanks to her willingness to share her experiences. Good, Lawrence said firmly. The publishing histories written by academics always miss the real story, how decisions actually got made, who really shaped the books that defined our cultural moment. He fixed me with a pointed look. Maggie knows where all the bodies are buried. Lawrence, I protested, laughing, you'll give Hannah entirely the wrong impression. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, he told Hannah with exaggerated innocence. Though there was that one literary critic we considered murdering after his review of the Davidson biography. He's joking, I assured Hannah, who seemed momentarily uncertain. Mostly. Elizabeth joined us, and soon we were engaged in a lively conversation that spanned publishing history and contemporary challenges. Lawrence held forth on the industry's evolution with his characteristic blend of incisive analysis and curmudgeonly complaints, while Elizabeth offered more measured perspectives on current trends. What struck me most was Hannah's engagement in this exchange, asking thoughtful questions, offering her own observations about digital publishing developments, and generally holding her own among industry veterans with decades more experience. Gone was the status-conscious young woman fixated on prestigious titles. In her place was an emerging publishing professional with genuine curiosity about all aspects of the business. Your granddaughter has impressive instincts, Lawrence commented, to me while Hannah and Elizabeth were deep in conversation about audiobook rights. Reminds me of you at that age. Sees beyond the obvious, asks the questions others miss. She's finding her own path, I replied, watching Hannah with quiet pride, though not the one she originally envisioned. The best paths rarely are what we imagine at the start, Lawrence observed with uncharacteristic philosophical awareness. If you'd told me when I hired you that my secretary would become the person I trusted most in business, I'd have thought you were delusional. Executive assistant? I corrected with a smile, our old terminology debate resurfacing. Whatever the title, Lawrence waved dismissively, you were the best business decision I ever made. Coming from Lawrence, a man notoriously sparing with praise during our working years, the acknowledgement was particularly meaningful. Not that I had needed his validation, but receiving it after all this time felt like the closing of a circle. After lunch, Lawrence insisted on seeing the office where we'd conducted the interview, claiming he wanted to ensure the current occupant wasn't desecrating my sanctuary with motivational posters or other corporate nonsense. As the four of us made our way through Meridian's hallways, I noticed staff members watching with barely concealed curiosity. The current CEO, the legendary founder, and two women they couldn't quite place. One clearly from Hannah's generation, one from mine. Back in the office, Lawrence walked slowly around the perimeter, shaking his head at the changes while acknowledging the improvements. They got rid of that ghastly radiator that clanged all winter, he noted with approval. Though I miss my old desk, that thing was built to last centuries. It was also impossible to move, I reminded him. Remember when we wanted to rearrange the office to make space for the editorial meetings? We needed 4 maintenance staff just to shift it a few feet. Quality has weight, Maggie, he insisted. These modern pieces will be in a landfill in, a decade. As Lawrence continued his inspection tour, Hannah sidled up beside me. He's exactly as you described, she murmured. Brilliant, opinionated, impossible, and somehow endearing despite it all. I smiled at her accurate assessment. Working with Lawrence was never boring. Challenging, frequently infuriating, but never boring. "I can see why you stayed for decades," she observed. "The intellectual stimulation alone must have been worth the difficult personality." "That, and the books," I acknowledged. "Always the books. Helping bring stories into the world that might otherwise never exist. There's magic in that, no matter what your title is." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to understand that more clearly now. The program has helped me see publishing as this intricate ecosystem where every role contributes something essential to the final product." Before I could respond, Lawrence called us over to the window. "Maggie, remember how we used to watch the Christmas parade from here? Best view in the building." "I remember you complaining that it disrupted your entire workday," I countered, while secretly enjoying every minute of it. Lawrence harumphed but didn't deny the accusation. "The point is, this office has history, stories that would never make it into the official corporate records. Which is exactly why Grandma's oral history project is so valuable," Hannah interjected. "It preserves the human experiences behind the business decisions, the culture and relationships that shaped what Meridian became." Lawrence studied her with newfound respect. "Well said, young lady. Perhaps there's hope for the next generation of publishing after all." Elizabeth, who had been quietly observing our exchange, checked her watch. "I hate to break up this historical reunion, but I have a board meeting in 15 minutes. We made our goodbyes, with Lawrence extracting a promise from Hannah to show him the completed project before you let the marketing department get their hands on it and turn it into corporate propaganda. Elizabeth invited me to visit any time, mentioning again her interest in using excerpts from the interview for Meridian's anniversary programming. As Hannah and I left the building together, stepping into the crisp autumn afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and forward-looking energy. We had spent the morning diving into my past, yet somehow the experience felt less like an ending and more like a new beginning, not just for my relationship with Hannah, but for how I viewed my own professional legacy. "Thank you for today," Hannah said as we walked toward the subway. "Not just for the interview, but for introducing me to Lawrence and for—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "For being so gracious about my past attitude." I was dismissive of your career for so long, and you had every right to refuse when I suddenly wanted your help. Instead, you created this opportunity for me to learn and grow." The sincere appreciation in her voice touched me deeply. "That's what grandmothers do," I said simply. "We want the best for you, even when you're being impossible." She laughed. "I was pretty impossible, wasn't I? So fixated on status and titles that I completely missed the substance of what makes a meaningful career." "You're hardly the first young person to make that mistake," I assured her. "The external markers of success are seductive precisely because they're visible and easily measured. The more meaningful aspects of work, impact, relationships, personal growth, are harder to quantify, but ultimately more satisfying." We stopped at the subway entrance, knowing we'd head in different directions from here. Hannah back to Meridian to complete her workday, me to my apartment in Queens. "I've been thinking," Hannah said hesitantly. "Would you consider presenting with me when I share the initial findings from this project?" Elizabeth suggested we could do a company-wide session about Meridian's evolution from the perspective of different generations. "Your first-hand experience combined with my research could make for a really compelling presentation." The invitation surprised and moved me. From keeping me hidden from her professional world to actively seeking to present alongside me, Hannah's transformation continued to amaze me. "I'd be honored," I said, "though public speaking has never been my forte." "You were fantastic on camera today," Hannah insisted. "So natural and articulate. Besides, who better to tell the story of Meridian's development than someone who helped shape it from the beginning?" As we said our goodbyes, I felt a surge of quiet joy watching Hannah descend into the subway, her posture confident, her mind clearly already planning the next phase of her project. Not only had she found her footing in the publishing world, but she had discovered a purpose that aligned her talents with something genuinely valuable, preserving the human stories behind corporate history, ensuring that contributions like mine weren't lost to time. In that moment, I realized that the evolution in our relationship represented something larger than personal reconciliation. It embodied a recognition that wisdom and value exist in unexpected places, that true impact often happens outside the eye spotlight, and that understanding history in all its complexity makes us better equipped to shape the future. On the subway ride home, I found myself mentally composing an email to some of my former colleagues, other executive assistants, production managers, publicity coordinators, and sales representatives whose stories deserved documentation as much as mine. Hannah's project had started with me, but it needn't end there. The rich tapestry of publishing history included countless threads woven by people whose names never appeared on mastheads or organizational charts, but whose contributions were nonetheless essential. By the time I reached my stop, I had a growing list of names and a sense of mission I hadn't felt in years. This project that had begun with Hannah's reluctant request for professional help had transformed into something far more significant. A genuine collaboration between generations, a reclaiming of overlooked history, and perhaps most importantly, a new chapter in my relationship with my granddaughter based on mutual respect and shared purpose. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I found myself thinking about all the young women currently working as assistants, coordinators, and support staff throughout the publishing industry. Talented individuals whose contributions might be overlooked or minimized simply because of their titles or positions. Perhaps Hannah's project, and my participation in it, might help some of them feel seen and valued in ways I rarely did during my working years. That possibility, that our personal reconciliation might contribute in some small way to broader professional recognition for undervalued roles, felt like the most meaningful outcome of all. Inside my apartment, I set down my bag and noticed the anniversary edition of The Boundary Stones, still displayed prominently on my coffee table, its introduction acknowledging my role in discovering Thomas Morton's talent. Beside it lay the Iwaya notes I'd been gathering for Hannah's project, memories, photographs, and correspondence that documented a career spent largely in the background, but with impact that continued to ripple outward decades later. I picked up the book, running my fingers over its embossed cover. My contribution to this particular literary landmark had finally been acknowledged in print, but the real validation had come in watching Hannah's understanding deepen. Seeing her recognize that meaningful work takes many forms, that impact often happens quietly, and that dignity exists in all roles performed with excellence and integrity. That revelation, hard-won through painful honesty and genuine growth, was worth more than any printed acknowledgement could ever be. It represented not just personal reconciliation, but a deeper understanding that would shape Hannah's entire professional life and, through her work, perhaps influence others as well. Sometimes the most important legacies are the ones passed not through public recognition, but through private understanding, through changed perspectives that alter how we move through the world and value those around us. As I set the book back down, I felt a profound sense of contentment. My granddaughter had once been embarrassed by my career, seeing only a title she deemed unworthy of respect. Now she was actively documenting and championing the value of that work, not just for my sake, but because she genuinely understood its significance. That transformation, from dismissal to respect, from embarrassment to pride, was perhaps the most meaningful achievement of my long career. Not the books I'd helped shepherd into the world, not the crises averted or the company built, but this, the recognition in my granddaughter's eyes when she finally saw me not as just her grandmother with an embarrassing job, but as Margaret Wheeler, publishing professional, whose legacy of quiet excellence was worth preserving for future generations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.